My name is Renata Holloway. I am 31 years old. On the 24th of December, my mother called me at 7:42 in the evening and told me, in the careful voice she uses when she has rehearsed what she wants to say, that it would be better if I did not come to Christmas this year. The family gathering was at my aunt's house in Lake Forest, Illinois. 41 people had been invited. I was the only one who had not received an invitation. When I asked my mother why, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Renata, you know how the family feels. Your business makes people uncomfortable. It's embarrassing, and your Uncle Gregory doesn't want that energy at the table this year." She paused. "It's just easier if you sit this one out." I sat on my couch in my apartment in Chicago with the phone against my ear and the Christmas tree I had decorated by myself 3 weeks earlier glowing in the corner of the room. I did not cry, I did not raise my voice. I said, "Okay, Mom, I understand." And I meant both of those things in the most precise way they could be meant. I did understand. I understood exactly what was happening, who had decided it and why. And what none of them understood, what not a single person in that family of 41 people sitting around my aunt's table on Christmas Eve understood, was that the venue they had booked for their New Year's Eve celebration, the one my Uncle Gregory had been describing to everyone at every family gathering for 4 months as the crown jewel of his business empire, was mine. I owned it. My name was on the deed. My company had managed the booking. And I had a signed contract in my files that gave me the legal right to repossess that venue with 48 hours, notice if any payment installment was missed. The second installment had been due on December 28th. It had not arrived. What my family did not know was that my fake business had been quietly growing for 3 years into something that would make everything they thought they knew about me completely wrong. This is that story. Before I tell you what happened on New Year's Eve, I want to stop and ask you something. Where in the world are you right now? And what time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know. This community reaches people in cars and kitchens and bedrooms across every time zone, and knowing that you are out there, that these stories land somewhere real, is the reason we keep telling them. If stories about women who were dismissed and underestimated by the people who should have believed in them the most, if those stories mean something to you, please subscribe and leave a like. You being here matters more than you know. Now let me take you back, because this story does not begin on Christmas Eve. It begins much earlier, in a family that had very specific ideas about what success was supposed to look like, and where a woman named Renata was supposed to fit inside it. My family is the kind of family that has a hierarchy and enforces it socially, which is to say they do not use the word hierarchy, but they arrange themselves by money and status and professional title at every gathering, and the arrangement is always the same. At the top is my Uncle Gregory Holloway, who runs a commercial real estate development firm called Holloway Group out of downtown Chicago. He is 58 years old, silver at the temples, the kind of man who announces his accomplishments the way other people announce the weather, constantly and without appearing to notice he is doing it. Beside him, by proximity and marriage, sits my Aunt Denise, who organizes the family's social calendar with the thoroughness of a military operation, and who has never once said anything unkind directly, but whose silences contain entire editorials. My father, Marcus Holloway, is Gregory's younger brother. He is a commercial architect, successful in a quieter way, and he has spent most of his adult life slightly in his brother's shadow and slightly at peace with that arrangement. My mother, Sandra, is an interior designer who works mostly with Gregory's development projects, which means her professional life and her family loyalty are the same thing. My older brother, Dominic, is 34, works in finance, lives in a 3-bedroom condo in Lincoln Park, and has never once been asked to sit out a family gathering. My cousin Priscilla, Gregory's daughter, is 29, works at the Holloway Group, and has the particular confidence of someone who has never been evaluated by a standard they did not help write. And then there is me. I am the youngest adult in the immediate family. For the first 27 years of my life, I was the one everyone called creative, which in my family is not a compliment, it is a category. Creative means interesting, but not serious. Creative means talented, but not bankable. Creative means she will figure it out eventually, but probably not in a way that will reflect well on anyone at the table. I studied event management and hospitality at DePaul University. I graduated with honors, which my Uncle Gregory acknowledged by saying, "Good, now go find a real company to work for." I worked for 2 real companies. The first was a corporate event planning firm on Michigan Avenue, where I spent 3 years learning how large-scale events were produced, financed, contracted, and managed. The second was a hospitality consultancy, where I spent 18 months learning the asset side of the industry, how venues were owned, leased, valued, and positioned. I left that second job in the spring of my 28th year with a business plan I had been writing in the margins of my evenings for 14 months, a small business loan from a community development lender, $60,000 of personal savings, and a company name I had spent 3 weeks deciding on. I named it Lumen Events and Venue Group. My family's response to Lumen was consistent from the beginning, and the consistency is important because it tells you everything about why Christmas happened the way it happened. My Uncle Gregory, the first time I told him about it at a family dinner in July of that year, set down his fork, looked at me with the patient expression of a man who has heard many small ideas and survived all of them, and said, "Event planning. So you're a party planner." I said, "I'm building a venue and events management company. The model involves both direct venue ownership and full-service event production." He picked his fork back up. "That's a hard business, Renata. High overhead, seasonal revenue, brutal margins. Most of them fold inside 2 years. I said, "I know. I've studied the ones that fold." He smiled the smile of a man who has not been contradicted in long enough that he finds it novel. "Well," he said, "let us know if you need help." He did not mean it as an offer. He meant it as a dismissal, dressed in the clothing of generosity. My father said he was proud of me, and then, privately, asked me twice in the first 6 months whether I had thought about a backup plan. My mother told her friends that I was doing something with parties. My brother Dominic said, "Events? Like weddings?" and then changed the subject to interest rates. My cousin Priscilla told me at a 4th of July gathering, with the warmth of someone delivering bad news gently, "I just hope you're not overextending. The hospitality sector is really unforgiving right now." She said it while holding a glass of wine that cost more than my first monthly office rent. I did not argue with any of them. I went back to my apartment and worked. Year 1 of Lumen was the kind of year that is invisible from the outside. I produced 11 corporate events. I secured 2 anchor clients, a mid-sized tech firm that needed quarterly all-hands events, and a nonprofit that ran 3 annual galas. I rented a small production office in the West Loop and paid for it entirely on the revenue I earned. I hired 1 part-time coordinator named Yolanda, who was 24 and faster than anyone I had worked with at either of my previous jobs. I did not make a profit in year 1. I came close. I made a profit margin of -4%, which, in the events industry in the first year of operation, is something very close to a victory. I did not share any of these numbers with my family because my family had not asked. Year 2 was when the pivot happened. I had been watching the venue market in Chicago for 18 months, with the specific attention of someone who studies a problem before they try to solve it. There was a consistent gap. Small to mid-sized companies and organizations needed high-quality event venues for between 50 and 200 guests, and the options available to them were either too expensive, too corporate, too generic, or too far from the city center. The boutique venue space was underserved in precisely the segment I knew how to reach. I found a property in November of year 2, a former warehouse space in the West Loop, 4,200 square feet, high ceilings, original brick, northern exposure windows that let in the kind of light that photographers describe in religious terms. The owner was an elderly man named Walter Frisch, who had been trying to sell it for 2 years and could not find a buyer willing to pay his price. I did not try to buy it. I proposed a long-term lease with a purchase option, structured so that a portion of each monthly payment built toward my eventual acquisition price. Walter said yes because the structure gave him income, security, and the eventual sale he wanted. I signed the papers on a Tuesday morning in December of year 2. The property was called, from that day forward, the Lumen on Washington. I opened it 9 months later, in September of year 3. After a renovation, I managed myself with a contractor named Earl Briggs, who I had worked with on 3 previous events, and who understood what I was trying to build. The opening of the Lumen on Washington was not covered in any major publication. It was not announced at any family dinner. I sent out a press release to the trade publications I respected and an email to the network I had built over 3 years, and within 6 weeks the venue had bookings through the following April. I hired 2 more full-time staff members. Yolanda became my director of events. I brought in a venue operations manager named Carl Desmond, who had run a hotel banquet department for 8 years and knew things about logistics I was still learning. Lumen was no longer a company that produced events. Lumen was a company that owned and operated a venue and produced events within it and contracted with other venues for productions that exceeded our capacity. In year 3, the company turned a profit of $84,000. In year 4, the year of the Christmas phone call, the company was projected to close at just under $300,000 net. My family knew none of this. They knew I had something called Lumen. They knew it involved events. My mother occasionally mentioned it to her friends as Renata's little party company, with the affectionate helplessness of someone describing a beloved but slightly embarrassing hobby. My Uncle Gregory had mentioned it at a family gathering the previous September by saying, "Still doing the events thing?" in the tone you'd use to ask someone if they still kept a sourdough starter. I had said yes. He had moved on. Nobody had asked about a balance sheet, a revenue figure, a client list, a property acquisition, or a lease structure. Nobody had thought to ask, because nobody had considered that the answers might be interesting. The Christmas exclusion had a specific cause, and I need to tell you what it was, because it matters to understanding everything that came after. In October, 2 months before the December phone call, my Uncle Gregory hosted a birthday dinner for my Aunt Denise at a private dining room at a restaurant in River North. During the dinner, he had been talking about his plans for New Year's Eve. He was booking a large private venue for an event he was calling the Holloway Group Year-End Celebration. He described it as a significant event: 120 guests, a formal sit-down dinner, live entertainment, a midnight toast. He had booked a venue for it. He had, in fact, booked the Lumen on Washington through a corporate inquiry that had come through my booking team the previous August, without anyone on my staff or his knowing that the client and the owner were related. The booking coordinator on my team, a woman named Fatima, had processed the inquiry, sent the contract, and received the deposit. The client was listed as Holloway Group. I had seen the name on the booking calendar and had thought, for one brief and genuinely confused moment, that it was a coincidence. Then I had looked at the address listed on the corporate contract, the same building on North Wacker, where Gregory's firm had always been, and I had understood that it was not a coincidence at all. My Uncle Gregory had booked my venue for his event without knowing he was booking my venue. I said nothing. I watched the booking move forward. Fatima processed it professionally. The contract was signed. The deposit, 30% of the total booking fee, arrived on time. I noted the second installment date, December 28th. And I made a decision that I kept entirely to myself. I would let it unfold. If he paid the second installment on time, the event would proceed, and at some point during that New Year's Eve, I would introduce myself as the owner of the space and allow the information to land wherever it landed. If he did not pay, I had a contract with a repossession clause. Then October's birthday dinner happened. Gregory had been describing the venue to the table, the ceilings, the brick walls, the lighting, and my cousin Priscilla had said, "Where is it? What's the venue called?" Gregory had said, "It's called the Lumen, some boutique space in the West Loop. The team found it online. It looks impressive." And my brother Dominic, who had had 2 glasses of wine and was in an expansive mood, said, "Lumen. Isn't that what Renata calls her thing?" The table had gone quiet in the particular way tables go quiet when something mildly awkward has been said. Gregory had looked at Dominic. "What?" Dominic had said, "Renata's company. Isn't it called Lumen?" Gregory had turned to my father. My father had looked at his plate. My Aunt Denise had said, very quickly, "I'm sure it's a different company, Dom. There are lots of companies with similar names." And the conversation had moved on. But it had not moved on for Gregory. I learned afterward, from my mother, who told me in the same phone call where she excluded me from Christmas almost as a footnote, that Gregory had looked it up when he got home from the dinner. He had found the Lumen on Washington's website. He had found Lumen Events and Venue Group. He had found my name listed as founder and principal. He had gone to his office the next morning and pulled the contract his team had signed, and he had seen that the payment had gone to an account registered to Lumen Events and Venue Group, LLC. And his response to this discovery, to finding out that the impressive boutique venue he had been describing to the family for 2 months belonged to the niece whose career he had been casually dismissing for 4 years, was not admiration. It was not curiosity. It was not even simple embarrassment. It was something harder than any of those things. It was anger, dressed as disappointment. He had called my father that evening and said, according to my mother's account, "Your daughter made a fool of me in front of my team. She let us book her venue without saying a word. That's not how family operates." My father had said he would talk to me. My Aunt Denise had apparently suggested, at some point in the following weeks, that perhaps it was better if I was not at Christmas this year, given the tension. And my mother had made the call. I sat with all of that information on Christmas Eve. The tree glowed in the corner. The apartment was quiet. I ordered Thai food and watched a film I had been meaning to watch for 6 months. And I went to bed at 11:15. I did not feel sorry for myself. I felt something much more useful, which was informed. I knew exactly where things stood. I knew my Uncle Gregory had not canceled the New Year's Eve event, because canceling it would mean acknowledging that he had been wrong to book it, and Gregory Holloway did not do that. I knew the second installment of the booking fee was due on December 28th. I knew my contract gave me the right to issue a 48-hour repossession notice if payment was not received. And I knew that Gregory, in his anger, in the particular pride of a man who had decided I had embarrassed him, might very well decide not to pay, as a form of leverage, or a form of punishment, or simply because he was furious, and payments are one of the things furious people stop making. December 28th came. I checked my account at 9 in the morning. No payment. I checked again at noon. No payment. I checked again at 4 in the afternoon, which was the contractual deadline. No payment. I called Patricia Nolan. Not the same Patricia, but the same kind of attorney. Deliberate, thorough, unsurprised. Her name was actually Margaret Chen, and she had been my business attorney since the 2nd year of Lumen. I told her the payment had not arrived. She said, "The contract language is clear. You can issue the notice tomorrow morning." I said, "I want to issue it myself, in person." She said, "Renata." I said, "Margaret, it's my venue. I will be professional. I will be calm. I will have every document in order." There was a pause. Then she said, "I'll have the notice ready by 8 in the morning." I spent December 29th preparing. I did not call my family. I did not call Gregory. I called Yolanda, who knew everything about the business and nothing about the family situation, and I told her I needed her at the venue on New Year's Eve for what I described as a client situation that required owner-level handling. She said, "How serious?" I said, "Significant, but manageable." She said, "Do you want Carl there too?" I said, "Yes." I called Earl Briggs, who had built the space with me and who I trusted completely, and I told him I might need him on standby. He asked no questions. He said, "I'll be available." On the morning of December 30th, I drove to the Holloway Group offices on North Wacker. I walked through the lobby, took the elevator to the 14th floor, and asked the receptionist if I could see Mr. Gregory Holloway. She asked if I had an appointment. I said I did not, but that I was the owner of the venue contracted for his New Year's Eve event, and that I needed 5 minutes of his time regarding the outstanding payment. She looked at me for a moment, then picked up her phone. 3 minutes later, she showed me to a conference room. Gregory walked in 2 minutes after that. He was in a dark suit, no tie, the relaxed power dressing of a man in his own building. He looked at me the way he had been looking at me since I was 8 years old, with a compound expression that had always contained, in varying proportions, mild affection, mild impatience, and the foundational assumption that I was not quite arrived at whatever I needed to be. Then the expression shifted slightly, because he was a smart man, and smart men recalibrate. "Renata," he said. He did not say it warmly. "Gregory," I said. I set a folder on the conference table. "I'm here about the outstanding payment for the New Year's Eve booking at the Lumen on Washington. The second installment was due December 28th. As of this morning, it has not been received." He sat down. He looked at the folder but did not open it. "I've been meaning to address the booking," he said, "given the circumstances." "The circumstances?" I repeated. "You deceived my team by not disclosing your ownership of the venue." I kept my voice very level. "I didn't deceive anyone, Gregory." A booking inquiry came in. My team processed it professionally. The contract was signed and the deposit was paid. At no point did I misrepresent anything. "You knew it was my company." "I knew it when I saw the signed contract, yes." "And you said nothing." "I was waiting to see if you'd treat my business the way you'd treat anyone else's." He was quiet for a moment. "The second payment," he said finally, "is something I need to discuss with my team. The notice period in the contract is 48 hours, I said. If payment is not received by 8 in the morning on January 1st, the venue booking is voided and any remaining deposits are forfeited under the breach clause. I would rather not be in that position." He looked at me for a long time. He looked at me the way you look at something when you are revising a story you have been telling for a long time, and the revision is uncomfortable. "You built this," he said. Not a question. "Yes." "That venue, you own it." "I do. I've owned it for 2 years. I've operated it for 14 months. "You could have told me. You could have asked." The room was very quiet. "I'm going to need a few days," he said. I stood up. "You have until 8 in the morning on January 1st. After that, the contract governs. Have a good day, Gregory." I walked back through his lobby, through the building, and out onto North Wacker. The December air was sharp and clean. I called Margaret from the parking structure. "He didn't commit either way," I said. "Then you go on New Year's Eve," she said. "I know," I said. "I've already planned for it." Now, if you are still here, I want to pause for just a moment and speak directly to you. Have you ever built something real, something you put years into, something that cost you sleep and savings and the comfort of other people's approval, and watched the people who were supposed to see you fail to look up? If that is where you are, or where you have been, drop a comment and tell me. You are not invisible here. Hit subscribe if this channel has ever made you feel less alone in the work of building something while no one was watching. Because the best builds happen in quiet, and the most satisfying moments are the ones where the structure finally speaks for itself. January 1st arrived the way New Year's days arrive, with a particular quality of stillness in the early morning, as though the calendar itself is holding its breath. I was at the Lumen on Washington by 8:15 in the morning. I had checked my account at 8 o'clock exactly. No payment had arrived. I texted Margaret. "No payment. Proceeding." She replied, "Documents are in order. Call me if anything escalates." I texted Yolanda, "On my way in. Tonight is happening." She replied, "Carl and I are already here. Earl is on standby. What do you need from me?" I replied, "Just be yourself. You're excellent at this." The Lumen on Washington on New Year's Eve was the most beautiful the space had ever looked. The event production team that Gregory's company had hired to decorate it, not my team, an outside firm they had contracted separately, had done extraordinary work. White and gold linens, tall floral arrangements in deep cream and champagne, candlelight along every table, a 12-piece jazz ensemble setting up in the northeast corner, a fully stocked bar along the west wall with crystal glassware catching the light from above, 120 gold-rimmed place settings. The space I had restored from a vacant warehouse, that I had negotiated and financed and managed and opened, looked extraordinary. It looked like exactly what I had always known it could look like. I stood in the doorway for a moment and let myself have that. Guests began arriving at 7 in the evening. I was dressed in a deep navy blazer and tailored trousers. Professional, understated, unmistakably the owner of the room rather than a guest in it. Yolanda was at the entrance coordinating with the catering team. Carl was managing the operational flow. I moved through the space with the calm of someone who has been in this room more times than anyone else present and knows every inch of it. I saw my family arrive in stages. My parents came through the door at 7:22, my mother in a silver gown I recognized from a Christmas 2 years ago, my father in a dark suit looking the way he always looked in these settings. Pleasant, slightly outside himself. Dominic arrived at 7:35 with his girlfriend Camille, who was warm and observant and had always been kind to me. My cousin Priscilla arrived with her husband at 7:40, looking effortlessly put together in a way that I had spent years feeling vaguely inadequate about and had long since stopped feeling anything about at all. And Gregory and Denise arrived at 7:55. Gregory in a tuxedo, Denise in a burgundy gown, Gregory moving through the room with the particular ease of a man who believes he is paid for the right to be comfortable. I gave them 40 minutes. I let them have their cocktail hour, their first glass of champagne, their conversations about the beauty of the room. I watched from a professional distance as Gregory gestured at the ceiling, at the brick walls, at the lighting, gesturing in the way he had been gesturing at this room to other people for months, taking pride in the choice of it. At 8:37 in the evening, I walked to the center of the room. I did not take the microphone. I did not need to. I walked to where Gregory was standing with a small group of his associates, and I said, "Gregory, I'm glad you could make it." He turned. His face moved through 3 distinct stages in approximately 2 seconds. Recognition, recalibration, and the particular tightening of a man who understands that a room has just changed around him without his permission. Renata. He looked at Denise, who was beside him. Denise looked at me. "I don't think you've met my venue manager," I said, and I gestured to Yolanda, who had appeared beside me with the quiet efficiency she always brought to complicated moments. "Yolanda has been managing tonight's production from our side. I wanted to come and introduce myself properly since we hadn't had a chance to do that through the booking process." One of Gregory's associates, a man I did not know, heavyset, silver cufflinks, said, "I'm sorry, you're the venue manager?" "I'm the owner," I said, "Renata Holloway. Lumen Events and Venue Group. This is my venue." The associate looked at Gregory. Gregory said nothing. Yolanda smiled pleasantly. My mother had drifted over from the other side of the room, drawn by some instinct that trouble was nearby, and she should be close enough to manage it. She arrived just in time to hear me say, "This is my venue," and I watched the color shift in her face. Not drain, exactly, but rearrange, the way a photograph develops when it comes into contact with something that makes it finally legible. My father was behind her. He looked at me with an expression I had not seen from him before. Not pride yet, but the precursor to it. The expression of a man who is revising a story and finding the revision more interesting than the original. Dominic was across the room. He had heard enough. He was looking at me with his mouth slightly open and a glass of champagne he had forgotten to drink. Gregory found his voice. "Renata," he said, and the word contained a question and a warning, and something that might have been the beginning of an acknowledgement, all layered on top of each other. "I'm glad the space has been everything you described it as," I said. "We've put a lot of work into it." His associate said, "Gregory, I didn't realize you had family in this industry." Gregory said, "She's my niece." "Impressive," the associate said, looking around the room. "Very impressive." Gregory looked at the ceiling, then he looked at me, and I saw in his face, very clearly, the specific expression of a man who has been wrong for a long time, and knows it, and has not yet found the language for what comes next. I did not humiliate him further. I want to be clear about that, because the story is not about humiliation. I did not announce to the room what had happened with the payment. I did not reveal the repossession clause. I did not make a speech. I simply introduced myself, answered the questions that came naturally over the following hour as word moved quietly through the 120 guests that the venue belonged to Gregory's niece, the one no one had heard much about, the one who apparently owned the place, and I let the room do what rooms do when the truth becomes available to them. People came to speak to me, associates of Gregory's who had heard him describe the venue for months and were now recalibrating everything they thought they knew about the family. A woman named Harriet, who was one of Gregory's longest-standing clients, and who told me within the first 10 minutes of our conversation that she had been looking for a venue for her daughter's engagement party, and could we talk next week. My cousin Priscilla, who found me near the bar at 9:15 and said, quietly and without the performance she usually brought to difficult conversations, "I didn't know, Renata. I genuinely didn't know any of this." I said, "I know. Nobody asked." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "I'm asking now." I told her I would send her our capabilities deck on January 2nd. At 10:30 in the evening, Gregory came and found me near the entrance. The room was fully alive behind him. Dancing, laughter, the jazz ensemble moving into something warmer and looser as midnight approached. He stood in front of me, and he was quiet for a moment, in the way of a man who is not accustomed to not knowing what to say. "You paid for the venue yourself," he said. "Everything in this room. You built this." "I did." "The renovation, the lease." "Yes." He was quiet again. "I said some things about your business," he said, "over the years, that were not—" He stopped. He started again. "I was wrong about what it was." I looked at him. "Yes," I said, "you were." He nodded. A single, slow nod. "The payment," he said. "I'll have it transferred first thing in the morning, with the late fee." "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate that." He stood there for one more moment. Then he said, "You're good at this, Renata." I said, "I know." He almost smiled. It was the most honest exchange we had ever had. My mother found me at 11. She had been circling me all evening. I had noticed, in the way she circled things she did not yet know how to approach directly. She put her hand on my arm and she said, "Why didn't you tell us?" I had thought about this question. I had known it would come. "Because no one asked," I said. "Not once in 4 years." She opened her mouth. I said, "Mom, I'm not angry, but I need you to understand that I stopped announcing things to people who had already decided what those things were worth before they heard them." She looked at me with the specific grief of a mother who recognizes that she is not in the story the way she thought she was. "The Christmas call," she said. "I know," I said. "I know you were doing what you thought you were supposed to do. I'm not going to make tonight about that." "I'm sorry," she said, simply, directly, without architecture. "Thank you," I said. "That matters." She squeezed my arm once and did not say anything else. She did not need to. Midnight came. The room counted down. Champagne was poured. The jazz ensemble played something lush and celebratory. 120 people in my venue welcomed the new year with the noise and warmth of people who have not thought very carefully about where they are standing. I stood near the entrance with Yolanda and Carl and watched the room, my room, contain all of it: the light, the music, the voices, the year ending and the new one beginning. And I felt something I had been building toward for 4 years without having a precise name for it. Not triumph, not vindication. Something quieter and more durable than either of those things. The feeling of a structure that has held. The feeling of having built something real in the time that other people spent doubting it existed. I want to tell you what happened in the weeks after New Year's Eve, because the aftermath of a story like this one matters as much as the story itself. Gregory transferred the payment on January 2nd, with a late fee, and included a handwritten note with the wire transfer confirmation that said only, "Impressive operation. Well done." I put the note in my desk drawer. Harriet, the client I had met at the party, booked the Lumen on Washington for her daughter's engagement party in March. 2 of Gregory's associates reached out separately to inquire about corporate event bookings. Priscilla and I had a 2-hour meeting on January 5th, during which she asked questions I had been waiting 4 years for someone in my family to ask, and by the end of it she had referred 2 of her own contacts to Lumen. My father called me on January 3rd. He did not have a speech prepared. He just said, "I want to come and see it, the venue. Can I come and see it?" I said yes. He came on a Saturday morning and walked through every room and did not say very much, but when we stood in the main hall looking up at the ceilings, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Your grandmother would have done something like this." His mother, Edna Holloway, had run a small catering business for 30 years out of the South Side. I had known about it my whole life. Nobody in the family talked about it as a business. They called it her cooking. I said, "I know, Dad. I named the company after her." He looked at me. "Lumen was her middle name," I said. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. My mother and I had a longer conversation in the second week of January, over lunch at a restaurant near my apartment. She asked me to tell her how the business had grown, from the beginning, year by year. I told her. She listened the way she had not listened before, not waiting for a gap to redirect, not performing attention while actually calculating something else. but genuinely listening. The way you listen when you understand that you have been missing something real. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I spent 4 years being embarrassed by something I never once tried to understand." I said yes. She said, "That's on me." I said, "Yes, it is." We sat with that. Then she said, "What do you need from me now?" And that question, simple, direct, arriving 4 years late, but arriving, was something I had not expected and had not prepared for. I took a breath and I said, "I need you to talk about it the way it actually is. Not Renata's little party thing. Lumen. What it is." She said, "Okay." And she meant it. I know she meant it because 3 weeks later she mentioned it to a friend of hers, a woman named Gloria, who was planning a charity gala, and Gloria called me and booked the venue. I think about what it cost to build Lumen in the years when no one in my family was watching. And I think the answer is not what most people assume. It did not cost me my relationships with them. Those were already on a particular footing that I had not chosen and could not change by argument or announcement. It did not cost me their respect, because that kind of respect, the respect that comes from watching someone prove something, was never available to me through any other means. What it cost me was quieter and less dramatic than any of that. It cost me the comfort of being understood by the people I was closest to. It cost me the particular ease of doing hard things in front of people who believe in you before you have the evidence. I did not have that. I had Yolanda, who worked beside me and knew what I was building. I had Carl, who came in and immediately understood the vision. I had Earl, who built the space with me and never once asked if I was sure. I had, without realizing it for a long time, a family of people who showed up and did the work. A different family from the one that had excluded me from Christmas, but a real one. I want to say something directly to you. If you are somewhere in the middle of a build that no one around you has recognized yet, the people who dismiss your work before they understand it are not your audience. They are not the measure of what you are making. The measure of what you are making is in the structure itself, in the floors and the walls and the signed contracts and the revenue and the clients who come back and the employees who stay. Build that. Build it as carefully and as quietly as you need to. The room will speak for itself when it is ready. And when it does, the people who doubted will come to stand in it and look up at the ceiling and say, "You built this," and you will say yes, and you will mean it in every direction. My name is Renata Holloway. I am 31 years old. On December 24th, my family asked me to sit this one out. On January 1st, I watched them stand in the middle of everything I had built and finally understand what they had been looking at for 4 years. I did not need an apology from every person in that room. I did not need a scene. I needed the truth to be visible in a space that belonged to me, and it was. And that was enough. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever built something in silence while the people around you looked away? And what was the moment they finally looked up? I want to know. I read every single one. Thank you for being here today. Every view, every comment, every share to someone who needed to hear this. It is the reason this community exists and the reason we show up every day. We release a new story on this channel every single day because there is never a shortage of women who built something extraordinary while everyone was busy deciding it couldn't be done. Subscribe so you never miss one. Leave a like if this one stayed with you. And if you know someone in the middle of her own quiet build, someone who is working in the margins of her evenings and not asking for anyone's permission, send this to her. She will know exactly what it means. We will see you tomorrow.